December 3rd, 1947, Ethel Barrymore Theater, New York City. A 23-year-old actor nobody had heard of walked onto a Broadway stage wearing a torn t-shirt and jeans, and in the next 2 hours, he would terrify the audience, scandalize the critics, and single-handedly destroy 200 years of American theater tradition. His name was Marlon Brando. The play was A Streetcar Named Desire. And what happened that night didn't just launch one man's career. It created a revolution that changed acting forever, made the torn t-shirt a symbol of masculine rebellion, and proved that raw truth could be more powerful than perfect technique. Broadway in 1947 was not ready for Marlon Brando. The theater world had rules. Actors spoke clearly, projecting to the back row. They moved with grace and precision. They delivered lines as written, with emotion carefully calibrated and controlled. Acting was about craft, about perfection, about giving the audience what they expected in exactly the way they expected it. Broadway was refined. Broadway was civilized. Broadway was about to meet Stanley Kowalski. Tennessee Williams had written A Streetcar Named Desire as a tragedy about a fading Southern belle named Blanche Du Bois who comes to live with her sister Stella and Stella's husband Stanley in a cramped New Orleans apartment. Stanley Kowalski, the husband, was supposed to be the villain, a brutish, working-class man who destroys the refined, cultured Blanche. Williams wrote him as crude, sexual, violent. But Williams, a gay man from the South who understood desire and danger and the power of masculinity, wrote Stanley with a strange fascination. This wasn't just a villain. This was something more primal, more dangerous, more real. The director, Elia Kazan, understood what Williams had created. Kazan was looking for an actor who could play Stanley not as a simple brute, but as a force of nature. Someone who could make the audience understand why Stella stayed with this man despite everything. Someone who could embody raw, dangerous sexuality while remaining somehow sympathetic. Kazan had worked with young actors at the Actors Studio, a new theater workshop in New York where they were experimenting with something called the method, a style of acting based on emotional truth and lived experience rather than technical polish. Kazan thought of Marlon Brando. Brando was 23 years old, unknown, difficult, and absolutely magnetic. He'd done a few small roles. He'd been thrown out of acting classes for being impossible to direct. He mumbled. He refused to project. He moved like an athlete, not like an actor. Traditional directors hated him. But Kazan saw something else. He saw someone who didn't act like he was on stage. He saw someone who simply was. When Brando read for the role of Stanley Kowalski, he didn't perform. He inhabited. He slouched into the audition room wearing jeans and a t-shirt. He didn't try to impress anyone. He spoke quietly, almost mumbling. When he read Stanley's lines, he didn't project to an imaginary back row. He spoke like a real person would speak, sometimes loud, sometimes soft, sometimes trailing off mid-sentence. It was messy. It was imperfect. It was absolutely riveting. Tennessee Williams watched the audition and reportedly said, "This is Stanley. This is exactly Stanley." Kazan hired him immediately. Rehearsals were chaos. The rest of the cast came from traditional theater backgrounds. Jessica Tandy, playing Blanche, was a trained British actress who believed in precise line readings and careful character work. Kim Hunter, playing Stella, was skilled but conventional. Carl Malden, playing Mitch, was solid and professional. Then there was Brando, who seemed to be ignoring every rule they'd ever learned. Brando wouldn't memorize his lines the traditional way. He'd read them over and over until he felt them. Then he'd say them however they came out in the moment. Sometimes he'd change words. Sometimes he'd pause in unexpected places. Sometimes he'd mumble so quietly the other actors had to lean in to hear him. Jessica Tandy was furious. This wasn't how theater worked. How could she give a consistent performance if she never knew exactly what Brando was going to do? But Kazan defended Brando. "Watch him," Kazan told the cast. "He's not performing. He's living." And they watched. They watched Brando move across the stage with the casual grace of an athlete, all coiled energy and barely controlled power. They watched him make even simple movements, scratching his stomach, adjusting his t-shirt, somehow dangerous and sexual. They watched him shift from charming to threatening in seconds, and they realized they weren't watching acting. They were watching a human being, unpredictable and real. The torn t-shirt became Brando's costume. It wasn't planned as a symbol. It was just what Stanley would wear. A man who worked physical labor, who didn't care about appearances, who felt comfortable in his own skin and his own body. But Brando wore it in a way that made it iconic. The t-shirt clung to his frame, showing his muscular build. It was slightly torn, suggesting roughness, suggesting a man who didn't care about refinement. When Brando moved across the stage in that t-shirt, sweat-stained and casual, it was both masculine and vulnerable, powerful and exposed. The t-shirt became shorthand for everything Stanley Kowalski was. Working class, sexual, dangerous, real. Opening night, December 3rd, 1947, arrived. The theater was packed with Broadway's elite. Critics, actors, producers, all expecting a typical Tennessee Williams play with traditional performances. The curtain rose. The set showed a cramped New Orleans apartment. The cast took their places. And then Marlon Brando walked on stage. The audience's first reaction was confusion. This young actor in his torn t-shirt moved wrong. He spoke wrong. His first lines, delivered to Kim Hunter's Stella, were soft, almost casual. He sounded like a real person, not like an actor projecting to 800 people. Some in the audience leaned forward, straining to hear. Others whispered, uncertain if this was intentional or if the actor was making a mistake. Then came the poker scene. Stanley and his friends play poker while Blanche flirts with Mitch. The scene builds tension. Blanche's refined manipulation, Stella's torn loyalties, Stanley's growing anger. The scene climaxes with Stanley smashing a radio, the women fleeing upstairs, and then the famous moment. Stanley, drunk and enraged and desperate, standing at the bottom of the staircase, screaming his wife's name. Stella! Brando didn't just yell it. He embodied complete desperation. His voice cracked. His body convulsed. It was a cry of need, of loss, of masculine vulnerability that traditional theater would never have allowed. It was ugly and raw and absolutely genuine. The scream lasted seconds, but in those seconds, the audience saw a man stripped of all defenses, all pride, all control. They saw someone completely exposed. The audience sat in shocked silence. Then Stella, drawn by that desperate need, started walking down the stairs. And Stanley, seeing her, fell to his knees. He buried his face against her. He was crying. The tough, violent Stanley Kowalski was crying. And somehow, it wasn't weak. It was devastating. It showed that all his violence, all his crudeness, came from somewhere deeper, from fear of loss, from desperate love, from emotions he didn't have words for. That moment broke traditional theater's spine. Traditional acting would have made Stanley's desperation theatrical. Big gestures, clear motivations, controlled emotion. Brando made it messy and real. He showed that true emotion is ugly. It's not controlled. It doesn't project to the back row. It simply exists, raw and undeniable. The performance continued. Brando's Stanley moved through the play with unpredictable intensity. In some scenes, he was almost charming, joking with his friends, teasing his wife. In others, he was terrifying, violent, explosive, dangerous. The audience never knew which Stanley they'd get from moment to moment. It was uncomfortable. It was thrilling. It was real. Jessica Tandy's Blanche DuBois, played with traditional skill and precision, became the perfect foil. Her refined mannerisms and careful line readings highlighted how different Brando's approach was. When Blanche spoke, she was performing. When Stanley spoke, he was simply being. The contrast illuminated what Williams had written: old world versus new, refinement versus raw truth, performance versus reality. The rape scene near the end shocked the audience, even in 1947. The script doesn't show the rape directly, it's suggested, implied. But the way Brando played Stanley's approach to Blanche, the way he cornered her, the predatory quality in his movement and his voice, it was clear, it was terrifying, and it was impossible to look away. The audience didn't just understand that Stanley raped Blanche. They felt the danger, the inevitability, the horror of it. Some people walked out. Others sat frozen. All of them had witnessed something unprecedented on a Broadway stage. When the play ended and the cast took their bows, the audience didn't know how to respond. There was applause, but it was confused, uncertain. Some people clapped politely. Others sat stunned. In the lobby afterward, the conversations were intense. What had they just seen? Was that good acting or bad acting? Was Brando brilliant or was he just undisciplined? The traditional theater crowd was divided. The younger audience members were electrified. The critics' reviews the next day reflected that division. The traditional critics were cautious. Some praised the play but expressed reservations about Brando's unconventional approach. They noted his mumbling, his unpredictability, his lack of projection. But other critics, younger ones more open to change, recognized what they'd witnessed. They called Brando's performance revolutionary, shocking, unlike anything American theater has ever seen. One critic wrote, "Brando doesn't act. He exists on stage with such complete reality that you forget you're watching a play." Word of mouth spread fast. Suddenly, everyone in New York wanted to see this shocking young actor in the torn t-shirt. The show sold out for weeks, then months. People who'd already seen it came back to see it again. They brought friends. Brando became the talk of New York theater. Not everyone liked what he was doing, but everyone had an opinion about it. Other actors started coming to watch Brando's performances. They'd sit in the audience, studying him, trying to understand how he created such reality on stage. Some were inspired. They saw a new possibility for acting, a way to bring truth to performance that traditional technique couldn't achieve. Others were threatened. If acting was moving in this direction, toward messy reality instead of polished craft, what did that mean for their carefully honed skills? For the rest of the cast, performing with Brando every night was an education and a challenge. Jessica Tandy later said that Brando terrified her, not because he was violent, but because his performance was so real, so unpredictable. "I never knew what he was going to do," she recalled. "Every night was different. I had to stay completely present, completely in the moment, because if I was just performing my lines, I'd look false next to him. He forced me to be better than I'd ever been." Kim Hunter, playing Stella, had a different experience. She found Brando's approach liberating. "When I acted opposite Marlon," she later said, "I wasn't acting with another actor. I was with Stanley. I could respond genuinely because he was giving me genuine emotion to respond to. It made everything easier and more terrifying at the same time." The show ran on Broadway for 2 years. 855 performances. Brando played Stanley night after night, and each performance was different. He never phoned it in. He never fell back on easy tricks. Every night, he found Stanley fresh, as if for the first time. Actors who came to watch noticed that Brando would sometimes change the way he said a line, the way he moved, the way he reacted. He was always exploring, always searching for truth in the moment. Other producers started offering Brando roles. Other directors wanted to work with him, but Brando was picky. He didn't want to repeat Stanley Kowalski. He didn't want to become a type. He was searching for roles that would challenge him, that would let him explore different aspects of human nature. Hollywood came calling with movie offers, but Brando was suspicious of Hollywood. He'd seen how the film industry turned actors into products, how it valued looks over talent, how it killed artistic risk. But the success of Streetcar made Brando's film career inevitable. In 1951, Elia Kazan directed the film version of A Streetcar Named Desire, with Brando reprising his role as Stanley. The film brought Brando's performance to millions who'd never seen the stage production. The torn t-shirt became an image reproduced around the world. Young men started imitating Brando's look. The t-shirt, the jeans, the casual swagger. James Dean, Montgomery Clift, and later actors like Robert De Niro and Al Pacino all cited Brando's Stanley as the performance that changed their understanding of what acting could be. The method acting technique that Brando pioneered became the dominant approach in American film and theater. Acting schools started teaching it. The Actors Studio, where Brando had trained, became the most prestigious acting school in America. Lee Strasberg, who taught there, built a whole pedagogy around the kind of emotional truth and lived experience that Brando had brought to Stanley Kowalski. But Brando himself became ambivalent about his success. He'd shown the theater world what truth could look like on stage, but he grew frustrated with how the method was taught and imitated. Too many actors thought mumbling and being difficult made them method actors. They missed the point. Brando's genius wasn't in his technique. It was in his ability to access real emotion, real truth, and bring it fully to performance. You couldn't teach that. You either had it or you didn't. For Tennessee Williams, Brando's Stanley became the definitive interpretation. Williams wrote other plays, created other characters, but none achieved the cultural impact of Stanley Kowalski as played by Marlon Brando. The playwright acknowledged that Brando had understood something about the character that even Williams hadn't fully articulated. That Stanley wasn't just a villain, but a tragic figure himself, trapped by his own limitations, capable of love and tenderness even as he destroyed everything around him. The STELLA scream became one of the most parodied moments in theater history. Comedians imitated it. TV shows referenced it. It entered the cultural lexicon as shorthand for desperate, masculine need. But the parodies, as frequent as they became, never quite captured what made the original moment so powerful. Brando wasn't performing desperation. He was embodying it completely. That's what made it unforgettable. Jessica Tandy won the Tony Award for Best Actress for her Blanche DuBois. Brando, despite creating the most talked-about performance on Broadway, didn't win Best Actor. The Tony voters, many of them from the traditional theater establishment, couldn't quite bring themselves to reward someone who'd broken so many rules. But Brando didn't care about awards. He'd achieved something more important. He'd changed the art form. The torn t-shirt itself became a museum piece. The costume Brando wore during the Broadway run was preserved and later displayed in theater exhibitions. Visitors would stand in front of it, this simple piece of clothing, and understand that sometimes a symbol becomes more powerful than its origin. The t-shirt represented working-class masculinity, raw sexuality, anti-establishment rebellion, American theater's break with European tradition. All of that in a piece of cotton with a rip across the shoulder. Looking back, theater historians mark A Streetcar Named Desire as the moment American acting split into before and after. Before Brando, American actors tried to emulate British tradition, careful diction, precise movement, controlled emotion. After Brando, American actors pursued something different: authenticity, emotional truth, the mess of real human behavior. European actors still admired technical skill. American actors chased reality. The impact rippled through generations. When Al Pacino played Michael Corleone opposite Brando's Vito in The Godfather, he was using techniques Brando had pioneered in Streetcar 25 years earlier. When Robert De Niro transformed himself completely for role after role, he was following Brando's example of total commitment. When method actors of the 1970s and beyond refused to break character, insisted on emotional preparation, demanded reality in every moment, they were heirs to what Brando started on that December night in 1947. Film schools and acting programs still show footage of Brando's film performance as Stanley Kowalski. They analyze his choices, the way he moves, the way he holds his body, the way his voice shifts from tender to threatening. They study the STELLA, scene frame by frame. trying to understand how one actor could convey so much complex emotion in a single moment. And they tell students, this is what truth looks like. This is what it means to fully inhabit a character. But Brando himself, in later years, dismissed the importance of Streetcar. It was just a role, he'd say. I did what felt right. He refused to romanticize it. He wouldn't discuss his technique. When asked how he prepared for Stanley, he'd shrug. I knew guys like that. I understood him. I just did what he would do. For Brando, the mystique around method acting, the elevation of emotional truth to an almost religious calling, was missing the point. Acting wasn't sacred. It was just pretending, but doing it honestly. That stance, that refusal to take acting too seriously, became part of Brando's legend too. He'd changed the art form, then walked away from the reverence around it. He took roles for money. He showed up unprepared. He made clear he didn't think acting was the most important thing in the world. And somehow, that made his early achievements even more remarkable. He'd revolutionized American theater not because he was trying to revolutionize anything, but because he simply couldn't do it any other way. December 3rd, 1947. A 23-year-old nobody in a torn t-shirt walked onto a Broadway stage and proved that truth was more powerful than technique, that raw emotion could trump polished skill, that American acting didn't need to follow European rules. Marlon Brando playing Stanley Kowalski didn't just change theater. He changed what audiences expected from performance. He changed what actors thought was possible. He created a revolution by simply refusing to fake it. The torn t-shirt became an icon. The STELLA screen became a cultural touchstone. The performance became legend. But what mattered most wasn't the symbols or the memorable moments. It was the proof that acting could be art by being real. That you could make an audience feel something genuine by feeling it yourself, completely, and without protection. That the messiness of human emotion, presented without artifice, could be more powerful than any carefully crafted performance. That night in 1947, in a theater in New York, 800 people witnessed the future of American acting. Some of them knew it. Some of them hated it. Some of them were confused by it. But all of them felt it. All of them understood they'd seen something that changed the rules. Marlon Brando in a torn t-shirt, screaming for his wife, crying without shame, being raw and real and utterly unafraid. That was the moment American acting grew up and decided truth mattered more than tradition. The theater still stands. The play still gets produced. Actors still audition for Stanley Kowalski, knowing they'll be compared to Brando. And every time someone puts on that torn t-shirt and tries to find the truth in that desperate, dangerous, tragic character, they're walking in the footsteps of a 23-year-old who didn't know he was starting a revolution. He just knew how to be real.